exploring life's journey, one story at a time. This is Trailheads with Jim Barrett. Today's guest helped chart a course straight into sci-fi history. He's the story co-writer behind one of the most celebrated episodes in all of Star Trek, Yesterday's Enterprise. Today we're warping to the big screen, talking Star Trek movies with the original cast, the next-gen films, and the controversial Kelvin Timeline. Eric Stillwell is here to talk canon, collaboration, and how the spirit of Star Trek has evolved across the generations. All right, Eric Stillwell, thanks again for joining me for Trailheads.
Thanks for having me.
You know, today we're going to talk about the Star Trek movies, which I was a huge fan of, and I'm sure you were. But I wanted to go back to the first one, Star Trek The Motion Picture, which premiered in December of '79. What was your mindset at the point that movie was coming out?
I was still in high school, and I was running Starfleet, the international fan club at the time. And so I was super excited. I remember when it finally came out in theaters, I saw it 3 times on opening night.
Wow.
And managed to get into the local newspaper with all the fans who'd been hanging outside the theater for hours and hours so they could be the first ones in to see it. It was just really exciting because the audience was so primed. I mean, the first audience was like diehard fans who, every time one of the original cast appeared on screen, everybody was applauding and cheering. So there was like all this energy and excitement in the movie theater. In retrospect, the movie was kind of slow, but there was so much energy in the movie theater and I just thought it was great.
Yeah, it was exciting because putting it back in that time frame is that we as Trekkies you had been watching the reruns for years, and then the animated series in the early '70s, but we had not seen these characters in something new in a decade.
It seems like we had waited forever for new Star Trek, and it literally was only 10 years. But now, when you think back that it's been 60 years since the original Star Trek,
Yeah.
it's funny how we have a different perception of time.
Yeah, definitely. Star Wars was what helped tee up the possibility for Paramount to do that and spend the money, seeing the excitement that and box office that Star Wars garnered. And it's interesting because I think of the originals, I think it's the third highest box office, again adjusting for inflation and ticket prices and all of that. The top box office grosser was Into Darkness, one of the JJ Abrams Kelvin Timeline episodes, which was one of my least favorites, not because I didn't love the actors. I thought the performance, I loved Benedict Cumberbatch. I loved all the actors they cast.
I liked the actors, but I didn't like the execution of it in terms of, to me, Benedict Cumberbatch was not Khan.
Yeah.
They should have had Benicio.
Benicio del Toro?
Yeah, he would have been a better Khan, in my opinion. When you go too far off the canon of Star Trek, it's difficult to accept.
I thought also that in the first Kelvin film, which I really liked it, I thought it was great. It was just fast paced. And again, I thought the actors were fantastic, especially, Carl Urban and Zach Quinto as Spock. I thought they were all really good. So you established this whole new sort of timeline where Vulcan is gone and things have unfolded a little bit differently, but it's still, our characters is still our Star Trek. And then the first thing you do in the follow-up is you take arguably the best original series movie and you redo it. It's like you could have done anything, and you're going to bring back Khan as Benedict. I just thought, come on.
Well, and some of it was like a little bit campy to me because I loved the first one because I loved the idea that they created an alternate universe where they could go against the history and continuity of Star Trek because it was a different universe. That made it so much more acceptable to me when they veered off and did crazy things like destroying planet Vulcan. But in Heart of Darkness, there was even a scene where Kirk goes into the warp chamber and is like literally kick-starting the Enterprise. It's like, come on. How campy is that?
So I wanted to go back to the theme of this podcast, which is Trailheads. For me, it's been focused on how getting outdoors and experiencing nature for me, has been instrumental in my own mental health. And I know you and your wife get out there and walk. Can you say whether getting out and being in nature and seeing the countryside, has that played a role in you guys' own mental health?
For me, absolutely, because on these beautiful sunny days with blue skies and fluffy white clouds, I just get re-energized. I love to get out and go visit some chateaus or medieval villages.
When you guys lived in California, was that the case too? Did you guys get out and see LA or get out and see California?
Yeah, we tried to. I mean, the weather was usually nice in LA, so didn't have to worry about the long, rainy, cloudy months of winter. But we'd get out right before we left for France. One of our last trips was up to the Santa Barbara area to visit the Sunstone Winery, which was the location that they used for Picard, the TV
Right.
series. Supposed to be Picard's French chateau. And that was really fun. We used to go up to the wine country a lot, either Northern California or Santa Barbara. Yeah, we tried to get out as much as possible. The only regret I have is we never made it to Yosemite.
Oh, yeah.
One of the most interesting things about that movie was the part where Spock was climbing up the cliff was actually a set piece that was laying flat. So
Oh,
so he was like horizontal instead of
like the old Batman, gag when
yeah,
Batman and Robin are,
yeah.
"Oh, and there's Sammy Davis Jr."
Yeah.
You know, I started this hiking group back in 2020, right before the pandemic, called SCV Hikers, and one of course, my favorites was to go to Vasquez Rocks, famous for lots of Star Trek, probably most notably Arena with Gorn in the first, was that first season or second? I think it was first season, right?
The trivia has started already.
Everybody knows the alligator guy that was in slow motion throwing boulders back and forth at Kirk, but that was probably the most famous appearance of Vasquez Rocks, and then it was in some others too, and it was even featured in JJ Abrams', first movie
Yeah,
when they went back to Vulcan.
yeah. We've taken some friends out there who were visiting from Canada, and everybody wore their little Star Trek costumes, and we did some role play stuff.
Nice.
There was also the West Valley, San Fernando Valley was where they filmed the locations for Starfleet Academy at at a water reclamation center.
Right.
And,
Oh,
so we would go there with people and visit Boothby's garden and do stuff like that. So, yeah, there was a lot of, fun things to do in Los Angeles. Like Will Rogers Park over in West LA was the location for in Star Trek 4 where the Klingon bird of prey landed in the park. It's supposed to be San Francisco, but it
right.
was really Los Angeles.
That's my wife's favorite. It was on the other night, and I came in, and she'll watch Star Trek with me, but she's not usually the instigator, and so I came in, and she was watching 4, and she goes, "I just love this one." I'm like, "Yeah." I said, "It was probably the most popular movie across the board." That was a great one.
Angels and ministers of mercy, God help us all to get this scene.
What do you think that we as Trekkies get out of the movies versus just series? Do you think it's a better place?
To me, Star Trek got its success from television by telling weekly stories. And the movies, even though several of them were great movies, w- there's this tendency in feature films that it has to always be the most cataclysmic event in the universe, and the Enterprise is always the only ship in the quadrant. Like the Starfleet has thousands of ships, and the Enterprise is the only one that's ever close enough to save the universe. When I was working for Michael Piller when he was writing Star Trek Insurrection, I specifically told him, please don't make it the Enterprise is the only ship in the quadrant, catastrophic event. And maybe I was wrong because it didn't turn out to be the most popular movie, but I still think that when people criticize Insurrection for being too much like an episode, I'm like, but you loved all the episodes.
Yeah.
Why would we suddenly do something different? It's like you can't say you love something, but if we make it into a movie, we'll make it a completely different animal, you know?
I thought for me, Wrath of Khan, I think stands. Even though I also loved The Voyage Home, the one with the whales where they go back. I love that one because that also felt kind of like an episode, even though it had more budget and was more epic. But just those ones where they go back in time were always fun, and that one to me sort of is the peak of that.
Yep, I agree.
First Contact is my favorite next gen movie, and one of my favorite all the movies because it also to me felt like it felt kind of like an episode. It was very story specific, and it was kind of a sequel, but it also was very it was epic in nature. I thought the effects were great, but I didn't think they went over the top. You had the one battle with the Borg at the beginning, which was kind of needed, but it didn't have to be in your face epic, cinematic scale necessarily.
Yes, yeah.
Were you there? So you were there, obviously Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, but then you worked with Michael, or were you on Voyager?
I wasn't on staff after the 5th season of Next Generation for 4 years, and then I came back after they did Generations. I wasn't there, I was running conventions, because I remember when Generations came out, I co-produced, a convention at the Royal Albert Hall in London, which we called Generations, the convention, and we had the entire cast, except for William Shatner, in London for this convention, so I was on the convention circuit back in those days. And then Lolita Faja was the script coordinator on the next 2 Star Trek movies.
So Insurrection, I got to be on set briefly for both, for one day for First Contact when they were filming the scene on the deflector dish with the Borg, with this huge set piece draped in green screen.
Yeah.
And then I got to be back for part of the scene where you're seeing the bridge blowing up and they reveal the joystick. I got to be there for some of that, and Jonathan Frakes was just wonderful because I was neighbors with his then assistant who got me on set because she knew I was a big Trekkie. And I remember, and I probably told you the story before, but what I was so blown away with is that, he had, I don't know how many people are on a Star Trek movie set, but I'd guess 100 plus. So I met him kind of at the beginning of the night when they had just done a set piece, and Ellen introduced me to him, and, "Hey, Jim, nice to meet you. Make sure you keep your earplugs in because we're doing some flashbangs." And I said, "Okay, all right, great." I had a great night. I was there for a few hours, and then when I was leaving, again, he has answered 200 questions and talked to everybody on set in that period of time. And I just came back by and put my hand on his shoulder and I said, "Hey, Jonathan, thank you so much for letting me be here." "Oh, Jim, it was great to meet you. Yeah, I hope you had a good time." And it's like, wow, it's in LA, so to remember your name and that 3 hours later, it's kind of epic. But
Well, Jonathan is really one of the great people in Hollywood, and he is a fantastic director.
which Star Trek movie do you think captures the Star Trek core ideals the best?
If Star Trek: The Motion Picture had been done with the costumes from the Wrath of Khan and a little more sped up action,
Yeah.
that it was probably one of the core concepts of Gene Roddenberry in terms of man versus machine and all that kind of concept that he was recurring throughout Star Trek, the original series, going back to the Changeling, and
Yes. I was going to ask you about the Changeling. Okay.
so there was a true sense that it was about the human adventure and the evolution of the human condition. And the other movies were a little more entertaining. I think Star Trek 6, which I was a Klingon in, was a little too on the nose. It had the notion of the original Star Trek, which touched on current events and things, but it was too much on the nose as far as trying to make an analogy with the Russians and the Americans and all that kind of thing. And it was a little campy when Spock was saying that he's related to Sherlock Holmes and and that only Nixon could go to China and all that. So it was I thought maybe Nicholas Meyer went a little over the top with some of that.
Why do you think, going back to the Wrath of Khan, why do you think that still comes up and dominates the conversation? What do you think is it? Because can we agree that it was one of the more special original
Oh, yeah.
series movies? Yeah. Why did it stand out for you?
I think the fans loved it because of the return of Ricardo Montalban, who was such a great villain in the original episode, Space Seed. And for me, it had a lot of different layers personally because I got to meet Bibi Besch, who played Carol Marcus, and later when I graduated from university in Oregon and went to Hollywood, I got to work with her because she used to teach performance workshops for actors and directors and people who worked in the business. And I went and became her videographer on a series of workshops where I even met some other great actors who ended up on Star Trek later on, including Joanna Cassidy, who played T'Pol's mother on Enterprise, was in one of the workshops. That was really cool, and knowing Bibi Besch personally was nice. And when she passed away some years later, I was just heartbroken because she was just one of the most genuine, nicest people. So for me, the Wrath of Khan always holds that element for me because I thought she was fantastic in that movie.
Small world moment is that I actually used to work with Bibi Besch's sister, Drea, at CBS.
Wow.
And one day, Bibi came in to have lunch with her, and I got to meet her briefly. In that little moment, I gathered she was like good people. And so to have worked with her, that must have been fantastic.
I reconnected with Drea just a few months ago by
Oh,
phone
oh really?
because I knew her from when I worked with Bibi.
Yeah, she was my first boss in LA. I mean, a guy named Steve Jacobson was the head of the department. And one of the reasons he hired me was because on my demo tape, which had a bunch of local promos that I'd produced in Memphis and Pittsburgh, but between them, I had interstitials from Star Trek. I had, like, after the first spot, I cut to Patrick Stewart saying, "Not good enough, damn it, not good enough." And then it goes to the next spot. So I had all these little quick little moments in it. And my future boss loved that because other people are like, I don't know if you want to do that, because it's kind of inside. And I'm like, dude, if somebody doesn't like it because of that, then I don't want to work for him. And so the guy who hired me in large part because I had the Star Trek clips in it. And then Drea worked for him. Drea was the creative director who I reported to do drama promos for CBS. What a small world, right?
Yeah, it is. It is such a small world.
You met a lot of the players, obviously, doing all the conventions that you did over the years. But I had these weird moments where I would run into people. I ran into two people in an elevator. I ran into Grace Lee Whitney when I was at Dalt's in Burbank one time. And one
Wow.
of the radio stations was in the same building. So she was going up or coming back for that, I think. And I met her. And then I met Nichelle Nichols at a convention in Pittsburgh where she and James Doohan were the guests. And I had you're familiar with Starlog, right? Did you have that
Yep.
magazine? Yeah.
Yep.
The third issue has the characters of the original series sort of hanging from a chandelier.
Yeah.
And so I literally had just bought that and a handful of other things on the merchandise floor. I get in the elevator and there's Nichelle Nichols with her person. And I said, "Oh," and she went, "Oh." I said, "I'm Jim. I just bought this magazine with you on the cover." And she goes, "Ooh, let me see that. She goes, "I like the way they drew my booty, baby." And so when you see it, so she's looking at it and I'm like, "Well, that magazine's been around since the 70s. She goes, "Yeah." She goes, "Well, I'll sign it for you right on my booty." And so she did. But
Nichelle's a kick. She's
yeah,
fun to hang out with.
she seemed to be one of those two that really got the fan thing, was always
Oh
so
yeah,
great.
that was one of the great things about doing the conventions was I just felt like a lot of the cast members, including George, have a genuine love of the fans and would spend hours with them signing autographs and talking to people. So,
George Takei you're talking about,
oh
yeah?
yeah, mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think he still does it. I hate to see
Oh, yeah.
his health right now, but he's out there in his little wheelchair going around and meeting people and talking, and he still's got that beautiful voice.
Yeah. Last
I
time we saw him was in London at a convention. Yeah, he made a beeline for Deborah when he saw her, my wife. He was just chatting her up.
I love that. Which of the movies, original series or next gen, do you think is the most underrated and deserves more attention than it got?
I often feel that Star Trek: The Motion Picture gets a bad rap because compared to Wrath of Khan and some of the later movies, it was a little it was sort of a completely different than what we had seen previously or after. And but in the context of the time when it came out, I mean, Bob Wise was a great director, and I felt like the film was almost on the level of Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey in terms of its scope and magnitude. But of course, you know, when you're trying to appeal to a certain audience that's used to the original series action, shoot 'em up kind of fist fight kind of thing, it's a very sedate film. But I still think when I watch it, it still holds a certain element of quality. In a lot of ways, I think Insurrection was underrated because it is a good movie.
I thought too that the actors had gotten so comfortable in their roles at that point that they could do little different things with it as well. I remember I saw Insurrection at the Chinese theater with my dad. He was in town visiting, and he really enjoyed it. He wasn't like a big Trekkie, but he's the one who introduced me to Trek in the 60s because he was watching it on NBC late Friday night. You know, it's funny that when my dad helped me drive across country, we went to Dalt's in Studio City. Do you remember? Not Dalt's, excuse me. Dupar's.
Dupar.
Yeah. He wasn't a starstruck kind of guy, but I had my back to the front door and he was looking at it and we're talking, and all of a sudden he just goes, "That's Gene Hackman. That's Gene Hackman right there. Isn't that Gene Hackman?" I turned around, yeah. And the same day in the same place was the actor who played the Admiral who told Kirk no about taking the Enterprise to go get Spock's Katra. So he was sitting at the bar, and then Gene Hackman was walking in at the same time to go meet up with his peeps.
That's funny. Did you
Yeah.
ever go to Coral Cafe in Burbank?
Yeah.
Because it was a 24-hour diner that was
Yeah.
popular with the studio people. I was in there a couple times. One time, Dorothy Fontana and her husband were there having dinner,
Oh,
and
wow.
and another time, my wife and I went in there, and Walter Koenig and his wife were having dinner in there. So it's
Wow.
funny the people you run into.
Yeah. I remember I saw the last Next Gen movie, Nemesis, at Sherman Oaks Galleria,
Oh yeah.
and it was at a late showing, and we came out of the theater in a weird way where we were, like, in the body of the mall, which was closed, and there was Eric Estrada. He was just there, like, window shopping the stores, and they were closed. So
Well,
it's
it's
like,
funny you should say that because I ran into him in a dry cleaners in Burbank, Milton Edie's dry
"Oh,
cleaner,
yeah, that
and
big one."
I go in and I'm look at the next station over was Eric Estrada, and I'm like, "How bizarre, 2 Erics."
That's awesome. The actor Robert Picardo, who played, the doctor on Voyager, and now he's
Yeah.
on, Starfleet Academy. He, I worked with one of his, classmates from Yale in Pittsburgh, this guy named Arthur. And Arthur, his first job in television was working for Mr. Rogers, who was a local hero in Pittsburgh. Anyway, so, at some point, Arthur had said, "Hey, if you ever happen to run into Robert Picardo, tell him I said hi." I'm like, "Okay, well, we'll see if that ever happens." Well, I get seated on him next to him on a flight to Memphis because back in the days on Northwest Airlines, you could pay $100 and get bounced up to first class. So I did, and there's Robert Picardo sitting right next to me in the seat. And at some point, I get the nerve to say, "Hey, we both have a friend, Arthur Greenwald." And he goes, "Oh, how do you know Arthur?" And we start talking. And he actually had a script that he was reading, and it was the first one that he was going to direct for Voyager, but could not have been a nicer man.
Yeah.
You must have worked with him with the conventions as well?
Oh, yeah. Most recently, I did a convention in Paris a couple years ago, and he was the other guest. It was sort of like, um an interesting theme convention. It was called Star something, but it covered Stargate, Star Wars, and Star Trek, and he
Oh,
was in
wow.
Stargate and Star Trek, so it was interesting. I got to actually do some stuff on stage with him at that convention.
He's another one of those kind of man of the people, it seems like, who's really good at interacting with the fans.
And yeah, he is, and we did some Star Trek cruises with him. Um, yeah, he's always been a nice guy.
Yeah. I just really loved, um, First Contact because on multiple levels, you saw, Zefram Cochrane again, this time played by James Cromwell, and I thought he really it was totally different than the one from the
Right.
series, but he really had a lot of fun with it, and I loved that they revisited him. It also was Going Back in Time, which is always a Trek, favorite. It brought back the Borg, which
Yeah.
was a fan favorite. Um, and Wolf 359. I thought it just had a lot of really fun aspects to it. And then that I'd been on the set that one day. How did you feel overall about First Contact?
I liked First Contact. I liked the guest cast, Alfre Woodard. Overall, I had a positive take on that movie. My favorite little insider jokes are because Brandon Braga co-wrote the film. There were suddenly the first contact with the Vulcans happens in Montana, which is where he's from, and
Oh, okay.
and that's why there was also in the show the USS Bozeman,
Oh, because
which was the
Montana.
one that um, what's his face who played Fraser was the captain of.
Kelsey Grammer, right.
Yeah, and so there's always all these sort of like inside things that it's depending on who the writers or directors are, and but overall I thought that was a really well done movie.
Yeah. Generations, which you didn't actually work on, but one of the things I noticed about it when it came out was that David Carson directed Generations,
Yeah,
who had also directed Yesterday's Enterprise,
yeah.
and I remember reading somewhere, and maybe you're the one who told me this, is that when folks got onto the bridge during Yesterday's Enterprise, it was like, "Wow, this is cool that it's lit like a submarine, it's dark," and then they brought that back for Generations, and then also for First Contact, but definitely for Generations, looked just like Yesterday's Enterprise in a good way.
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, when they did it on Yesterday's Enterprise, it was to convey an alternate universe in a darker time with the war, and so they might have liked it a lot. I liked it a lot, but
Mm.
it would have been weird to suddenly switch to that for the rest of the series.
Yeah. Now, remember when there was hubbub about that Quentin Tarantino was gonna do a
Oh
Star
yeah,
Trek movie?
yeah.
How did you feel about that? I had my own feelings about it. How did you feel about that
Well,
possibility?
I was complimented by Quentin Tarantino, who said that Yesterday's Enterprise was his favorite episode
Oh, wow.
in some
Nice.
interview. I never met him personally, but he said that in an interview, and it was almost like that's the kind of movie he wanted to make. So
Wow, that's a great
I'm like,
compliment,
"Well,
Eric.
that's
That's
cool."
fantastic.
Yeah, I thought that was cool, except in his version, everybody would be slaughtered and half dead.
Oh, that's what I wanted to ask you. Is it true that because we see Riker get killed on camera, alternate Riker, is it true that for Yesterday's Enterprise, that in the battle scene that you saw everybody get killed, but they cut that out of the episode? Is that true?
Well, I know in the story that Trent and I worked on, we did have. I know Will Wheaton hates this. We did kill off Will Wheaton in that scenario because it was sort of a fan fantasy. And then there was also supposed to be a shot where Data gets electrocuted and fried. Almost everybody was killed off. Marina
Yeah.
Sirtis didn't like that episode because she
I
was,
was gonna ask you about that because she wasn't it was in the bookend, but that's it.
and she always makes a big point of that every time I see her. I wasn't in that episode. I'm like, you were sitting there at the beginning.
In my little, first attempt at writing a script of my sequel to Mirror, Mirror, and Picard's like a pirate and, everybody had their other version. I had Troy is like a mind reader who, like, helps Picard figure out the psyche of what the enemy's thinking there, and so she was kinda like his secret ace in the hole, but I totally got why she wouldn't have been on a battleship necessarily. But I was wondering how she felt about that episode. "Oh, you get a week off, but sorry, you're not in one of the best episodes ever made."
Well, at least she was sitting there, so she gets residuals.
Yeah, oh, right, right. For half a day's work, she gets residuals for that episode, that's right. I didn't actually meet her, but I used to work out at this gym in North Hollywood, And one of my trainer said, "Hey, I heard that there's somebody for Star Trek is here working out." I'm like, "Really?" And I'm looking around. I didn't recognize anybody. And then I double taked, and it's like, "Oh, that's Marina over there, of course, with no makeup on, her hair pulled back, and a baseball cap." And it's like, "Oh, that's Marina Sirtis. She's on." Yeah, so she was working out at this gym. I only saw her the one time though.
That's funny
Uh,
because we went to see her in a panto at a theater in North Hollywood, and she was playing the evil queen in
oh,
Snow White or whatever panto it was that we, and it was hysterically funny because uh, in one scene where she's sitting on the throne in the castle, all the doors to the chamber are like Star Trek doors that go. People came in, and so we waited afterwards to say hi to her, and then she said, "Hey, why don't we go get a drink?" And we went to the bar next door. I think it was called, what was it called?
the Federal?
Yeah, the Federal
Yeah,
bar, and we
yeah.
had drinks with her there at the bar.
I used to love that place. It closed down in the last couple of years, but of course, it used to be a bank, and that's why they call it the
Yeah,
Federal. Ran into Tim Russ at the Emmys back in the '90s at some point. He was I think yeah, he was on Voyager at that point, and we shot the breeze, and somebody got a picture of us looking pretty blitzed, but not that Tim Russ ever got blitzed, sorry. Um,
of course
uh
not.
I loved what he did when they brought him back for Picard for his, you don't know for a moment if he's a good guy or a bad guy, and then what he
Yeah,
did with it, and then he got to come back and be his regular self.
yeah.
He's also one of those big advocates for the franchise too, I believe.
It's funny when you see him in old Star Trek movies and stuff before he was Tuvok.
Right.
He's in one Star Trek movie. Just
He's been Generations, yeah, he's on the bridge crew at the beginning with the press conference thing. He's a bridge officer. And then, of course, he was in that Next Gen episode, Starship Mine, where he played a terrorist who was like,
right,
yeah.
and then Voyager. He not in Voyager. Wasn't, well, the one where they brought back Sulu, and he got to be on the bridge of the Excelsior.
Oh, right, yeah. And then, of course, Spaceballs.
Yeah,
It's interesting you said that you just recently watched, the motion picture again recently. I did too, probably a month ago. And one of the things that surprised me is because that was being shot in, like, 1978, almost 10 years before Next Gen, but how much even, like, the corridors of that Enterprise were like the ones that would eventually be on the Enterprise D,
yeah.
that the just the shape of the corridors, and they were more monochromatic in the movie. But it was interesting to see. I mean, they were almost spot on what the Next Gen corridors end up looking like later.
Well, I know they use the same sound stages. They may have pieced together some old set pieces too. So
Yeah.
because the set where the engineering, warp core and all that had been reused several times throughout the various movies and Next Generation.
Right. Well, and I know that, one of my favorite just sort of, Trekkie moments too was that for the first time you see presumably the whole crew of the Enterprise assembled in I guess, the rec room
Oh
when,
yeah,
go on the viewer what happened to the Klingon ships, and you had all these people, and I know that there were a handful of, Bijou Trimble and, David Gerald, I think, was in the crowd
yeah.
scene, and probably
Susan
had you been a
Sackett.
little older, you probably would have been there too.
Well, yeah, and I know Susan Sackett was up on the balcony in the background, and Denise Okuda before she was a Okuda was in that scene also. So
Oh, really?
she was a big Star Trek fan. Yeah, a lot of people were got to be in that scene.
Did those 2 meet on Star Trek, do you know?
Yep,
Did they
yep.
meet working on the
On
show?
Next Generation, I think.
That's awesome.
We touched on this earlier about Gene Roddenberry sometimes copying himself over time, because like Star Trek: The Motion Picture was kind of like The Changeling, in terms of, except they just had more money to do what they wanted.
Yeah, yeah.
But one of the things that's interesting to me is in Star Trek: The Motion Picture, we basically get the cast of Star Trek: The Next Generation. You know, instead of Kirk, we have Picard. Instead of uh, Decker, we have Riker. Instead of Ilia, we have Troy. And then all the rest of the original series cast. And there's very distinct similarities between those characters in Star Trek: The Motion Picture and then those characters in Star Trek: The Next Generation.
When it's done well, though, I mean, like even some of my favorites from season 2, or I take it back. This is not from. I'm going to come back to that. But one of my favorite Jonathan Frakes directed episodes was Cause and Effect. It's the one where at the end Kelsey Grammer shows up, where the Enterprise blows up over and over and over. They got to figure out first that they know that they're reliving the day, and second to figure out how to stop the loop. I love that episode, but it felt like other episodes. It's had nods to other episodes, and maybe it's just the Star Trek, alternate reality, sort of time travel, sort of not. But when it was done really well, or like, shoot, what's the one? Times Squared, where they encounter Picard from 6 hours in the future, and what happened, and how do they stop? And I guess that was the Enterprise blowing up too. So,
Yeah.
uh, but when they do episodes, and they're fun, the way that it's executed, people say, oh, all the time travel episodes were great, and they are favorites, but and this isn't really a time travel one. Sorry, Eric, I'm jumping around a lot right here. I'm doing
That's
my
okay.
gym. But one of my least favorite original series episodes was A Piece of the Action. And when I say that, people are like, oh, really? I love that episode. And I just thought it was so tongue in cheek. I can't even go back and watch it. How do you feel about that one, for example?
Well, I thought it was on par with Trouble with Tribbles as a comedy episode.
Yeah.
One of the things I've noticed now, I might be a little slow, and it only took 50 years for me to start realizing. The more I watch reruns of the original series, the more I feel like they all fit into like a thematic category. Like, how many times has some admiral or ambassador or somebody come on the Enterprise who thinks they know better than Captain Kirk, and and then, or there's how many times have we been stuck in a decaying orbit and the ship's gonna burn up in the atmosphere? I mean, it happened like over and over and over,
Yeah.
and I guess I never really paid attention until recent years, still watching the reruns after all these years. But I think the thing about Piece of the Action and Miri and a bunch of shows was how many planets in the galaxy are identical to Earth. Not just the exact continents and everything, but the exact
Yeah.
culture.
Right.
And I think that probably just goes back to a different time, a 1950s, 60s sci-fi sort of notion. It wasn't pure science fiction as much as it was almost like they just wanted to have these analogies to
Yeah.
Earth. Then it's like, I'm like, couldn't they at least have different shaped continents?
Right.
I
I
mean,
think bread and circuses, it was the exact continents, except
oh
for they
yeah.
had Gladiator television, right?
Well, I think it was in Miri too, right?
Oh, was it? Okay.
When they went down to the planet, and I think at one point we get Spock explain to us the concept of parallel evolution or parallel development or something like that. But after a while, you're thinking, how many times are we going to go to a planet that's exactly like Earth?
I tell you though, when you were talking about like a rogue admiral comes to the ship and makes all the bad decisions, I did love what they did with the Doomsday Machine. That actor who played Matt Decker, I thought it was that he had the post traumatic stress from
Yeah.
his causing his crew to be killed unbeknownst to him, and then it happened. I thought that him being in that condition, at least that had a really good reason why. He wasn't just some idiot who showed
Yeah.
up, that he had the post-traumatic stress, and I thought he played that role really well. That was a great one, and the
Well,
challenge between him and Spock too on the bridge.
well, tonight I was watching the Deadly Years, and I was thinking, when the guy takes command of the Enterprise because Spock and Kirk are aging and they
Yeah.
no longer, and he was just so lame. I'm like, totally lame. Like, I guess we should just surrender to the Romulans, and even Chekhov's like, the Romulans don't take prisoners.
Yeah. What did you think of Next Gen episode Chain of Command with Ronnie Cox showing up?
I always have issues with storylines that involve asshole Starfleet people. Because to me, this isn't what Starfleet is about. But even in conspiracy, supposedly they were under the control of aliens. But even in one of the JJ movies where the admiral was evil and I think he was supposed to be Carol Marcus's father, Admiral Marcus.
That was
I
what's his
don't.
name? RoboCop actor, I
Yeah,
think, right? Yeah.
and also in Insurrection. To be honest with you, I don't like Starfleet conspiracy stories where Starfleet is bad. I just don't like those because
Well, what
it
I do
goes against the grain of what Gene always preached about what Starfleet was about, a
yeah,
better humanity and all that. I know
well,
it makes for an interesting storyline, but I just don't like them.
yeah. It would have been interesting to see, and I guess we got that just with our different captains, with Janeway and Burnham and the different character Cisco. By the way, I just watched the full episode of Starfleet Academy about Cisco. That was interesting, and I loved seeing his son. The actor who played his son in the episode was great.
So you watched that just since we talked about it earlier? No,
Yeah, watched it yesterday. Yeah, yeah. This is a two-parter, everybody. By the way, hence the lighting.
So did you like it?
I liked it. I was watching it with my wife, and she's like, "Do they really just think that younger people are going to watch it because it's full of young people?" And I was like, "Well, that's true. I was a kid, and I didn't need to have 12-year-olds on the show to enjoy Star Trek. I didn't have to have that." So that I thought she raised a good point. I liked it, and I liked seeing it from that character.
Conversely, is it bad to be able to tell stories about young people? Do you have to be
No,
young? Like, no, I don't know.
yeah,
I mean,
true.
because I think they're trying really hard to do the character development on the characters in a
Yeah,
way that they never really did with Next Generation or the original series
right.
to the same extent.
Yeah,
Um, but I just love the parts of like the voiceover from Avery Brooks at the end of the episode. Spoiler
uh-huh.
alert. Um, it was actually taken from an album a jazz album that he did. That was
Oh.
spoken
I was
word.
wondering if that was a lift or if he recorded that. So, okay, it was
He
from some.
didn't do it for Star Trek. It was just
Okay.
something that Cirroc Lofton got permission to use it because he
Oh,
and Avery still had a good relationship, and so it was actually Cirroc Lofton, who plays Jake Sisko,
yeah.
who made the arrangements and got permission from Avery to use that voiceover,
Wow.
and it worked
Wow.
so well in the episode. I thought
It did. It totally did. That's why I was curious. Only because of production limitations did I wonder if that was a lift, but I thought it worked so perfectly in the story, like you said.
Phaser
Okay.
Arm's son.
Yes. Hey, this is your phaser round, Eric. Okay. As far as the movies, what's the best movie?
The best movie. My personal favorite is The Voyage Home.
What is the most underrated movie?
I still think Insurrection.
I'm pretty sure I know where you're going to go with it, but I just want to say, who's the best Spock?
Zachary Quinto. Just kidding. I'm kidding. I love Zachary Quinto as Spock, but I think Leonard Nimoy is the best Spock.
Yeah. In the movies, who's the most wasted character?
Wasted character in all the different variations. Uhura.
Who has the most breakout performance in the movies?
Probably Walter Koenig.
especially in 4. He was, we're looking for the nuclear vessels.
Yeah.
What's the most action heavy?
Probably Into Darkness or whatever it was called.
Which one had the best opening?
The best opening. That's so hard. I don't know. I don't know.
My favorite is when you're talking about the motion picture. I love the Klingon sequence at the beginning of the motion picture. I just thought that was great.
That was good. I loved the ending with all their autographs. I think it was Star Trek 6.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And the one that was dedicated to the crew of the Challenger. I think that was the same movie.
Do you remember the first time we saw a black female starship captain in Star Trek? The whole realm, everything.
I think the captain of the Saratoga in Star Trek 4.
Bing, 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 bing. You got it. And here's the bonus part of that question. Do you remember that same actress came back to play another starship captain in an episode of TNG?
She wasn't Geordi's mother. No.
Yes.
No, she was?
Yes. It's the late actress Madge Sinclair. And she played, like you said, she played the captain of the USS Saratoga in Star Trek 4, the one with the whales. And then she came back to play a different character, but like you said, Geordi's mom. She was the captain of the USS Hera in the episode Interface.
And Geordi's father was?
Ben Vereen.
Yeah.
Same episode, right?
Yeah.
What's the best TNG film?
I'd say First Contact.
Okay. What about the best original series film?
I still think Voyage Home was fantastic.
Okay. Which movie of all of them do you think was the riskiest one?
Well, probably Star Trek: The Motion Picture, because the whole franchise kind of depended on the success of that one film, and in the long run, it didn't have the best reviews, but it was still successful financially, so it didn't kill the franchise.
Now this might be the most difficult part of the phase around. Khan or the Borg?
Khan.
Kirk or Picard?
Kirk.
Spock or Data?
Spock.
Okay. That was easier than I thought. Okay.
Now, I used to say, people would always ask me, who's your favorite character on Star Trek? And I'd say, it's an ensemble. It's not like one of them is my favorite. It's all of them together that is my favorite. I mean, ultimately, it's like the Enterprise is my favorite character. I love the Next Generation characters too, and I worked on the show. So I have nothing against it, but I was a huge fan of the original series, and that's where it all started. So
sure. My little tribute to the enemy within. This is Lolly, who's missing the horn on her head, but this is Lolly, who's been patiently watching us.
And she's the nice one.
She's the nice one, right? She's the one unaffected by the transporter problem. They had a lot of transporter problems too, didn't they?
Yeah, I love the new transporters in the new show. It doesn't matter where you are; you can just zap out
anywhere, right?
And that's like in the episode number 5 of Starfleet Academy when the captain tells the holographic character there's a Cisco museum in New Orleans.
Right.
I'm like, well, she's right there on Earth. Why doesn't she just beam over there?
Right. She can do it. Be there, no problem.
Instead, they do a museum simulation or whatever. And like, but she could have just zapped herself over there and been in New Orleans.
Eric Stillwell, thank you for joining me again for Trailheads. I appreciate you taking the time out because we've intertwined 2 episodes here, which is where you'll see Eric go into daylight and nighttime, and you'll see me get a haircut in the middle of it too. So,
and watch entire episodes of Star Trek in between.
That's right. Well, thanks, man. I appreciate it, and we'll do this again at some point. I'm sure we'll find other stuff to talk about.
Yeah, it's fun. By the way, can I just tell one more story?
Yes.
years ago, because when I was in college and I was running Starfleet, the international fan club, um, I used to buy stuff from Federation Outpost or whatever that place was back east, and there was Jeff Maynard and all these people who were involved in fandom. And I
I
remember,
interviewed Jeff Maynard in my little evening magazine story, by the way.
oh
But
wow.
go ahead. Yeah.
So I may have told you the story once, but I got a call from one of these people, and they were basically calling all these sort of prominent Star Trek fans because there was talk of a new Star Trek coming back in the late 70s, and they wanted to get people's ideas of what would Star Trek be like in a more advanced version of Star Trek, presumably the 24th century. And I remember, like, one of the ideas that I had back then, back in the late 70s, was that they would have, instead of wasting so much space on the ship with turbo shafts and things going all around, that there would be doorways, but the doorway would be surrounded by this kind of like a force field technology that was integrated with the transporter. So
Mm,
you would just say where you wanted to go as you walked through the door frame, and you would come
mm.
out on the other side in the next set.
That's pretty cool.
And of course, that was probably way beyond their ability back in the 80s or early late 70s. But I feel like it's evolved up to that now in the,
Yeah.
the modern Star Treks, where they can just beam in, beam out wherever they are.
Well, like,
Anyway,
especially in the episodes of Picard where you see Starfleet and people are just coming and going through those little, portals,
oh yeah,
uh, campuses of Starfleet. I love the idea. I'll say that I love the idea that the Athena is sort of the class, instead of being in a classroom at the brick and mortar, Starfleet Academy, which they are too. But I like that idea in the pilot episode, especially where it's like a classroom in space, that you're untethered and you get to have the sort of Wesley experience of being,
yeah.
on a starship and not just taking classes the whole time. So I'm gonna give it more time. I again, my wife is like, "Why are you watching this?" And I'm like, "Come I have to watch it. I have to do it."
And
To
I
check
also
that out.
wanted to share something with you. Um,
Yeah.
I got an email today from David Livingston,
Oh, wow.
and David was the producer who hired me to be a production assistant on Next Generation. And last year, and for the past year, I've been helping him look for convention appearances in Europe because he's interested in doing more convention appearances. But he sent me this lovely email today, and sometimes you think as much as you know someone that you worked with for many years, you don't really know what they thought of you personally. But in this email, he said, "I have many fond memories for the people I had the honor to work with on Star Trek, but Eric leads the list, a true mensch in every way." You thought, wow,
That's great.
that is so nice. I mean,
That is very nice. Congratulations.
because he worked with a lot of people on Star Trek, so
Right.
that's a nice compliment.
Well, I gotta tell you too, beyond just being my hero in terms of writing such a great episode of Star Trek, it meant a lot to me that as I was a struggling writer, back in the day and trying to get an episode, that you were so patient with me and you paid attention to me and you made me feel special, even though you were talking to hundreds of people, I'm sure, every week. Um, and you invited me to that convention where you guys were gonna doing because the internet wasn't really around yet, but you invited me to go, "Hey, I'm gonna be there with Ron Moore." Just I don't know, you were just very personal in that way. And I just really appreciate it. It was very nice of you to do. So thank you for that, Eric.
Well, thank you. I'm glad I impressed a few people.
All right, man. Well, have a great rest of your week, and we'll be talking again soon.
All right, thank you.